Greetings, salutations. How's it going out there? Ryan's at Triathlon.com, and we're going to do some quick tips, quick as possible, as comprehensive as possible, talking about rubbing disc brakes on your bike. So, like me, you start off in the world of rim brakes and then switch over to disc brakes, and then you get to a point where you've got race wheels and just everyday wheels, training wheels, and all that kind of stuff. And guess what? Not all the wheels are going to be the same width. Not all of the disc brakes are going to be the same width. Or they also the same exact distance from the hub to the brake, and they don't fit in the pads exactly as you intended. And unfortunately, more often than not, the disc brake system is not smart enough to recalibrate. It does to a certain extent, but if it's way off and that disc brake is pressing against one pad or the other, and after you ride it a few times, if it's just not recalibrating to where that brake pad or the disc in between the brake pads is not rubbing on either side, then you need to consider doing a little bit of a self-help adjustment to get you on the road. And I'm going to go through it real quick, and hopefully you can follow along. So what you'll need to do is take your bike and either put it in a position where you can take the rear wheel off, or get at the disc brake and the caliper itself. More often than not, I put my bike upside down, usually on the ground. I put it on something to where it's stable. You don't want to flop around, so I might put it upside down in the living room, kind of leaning against a coffee table or something like that. So that way I can move the rear wheel. I can take it off if I need to. I can get to the calipers and the actual braking system that is attached to your frame, because you need to get to the bottom side of that so you can unscrew it from the frame, because that is the key important part, is to make sure that you get it off the frame so you can help adjust and get your system right. So lift the wheel that's rubbing off the ground, give it a spin to determine rub. Are you inside, the outside? Is it really that bad? If it is, this is where we're at. You got to take it off and do a little bit of adjustment. A bent rotor will often make enough noise, or often makes enough noise. Unfortunately, that's probably not written the best way. If the rotor's bent, it's not going to be on there all the time, so give it a spin. If it's like on, off, it means your rotor's bent, so you probably need to take it to a bike shop and have them kind of bend it back into the plane, and you should be good to go, hopefully. But if it's not bent and it's just rubbing on the brakes the entire time, keep going. You can try squeezing and releasing the brake lever, get released for first fixed try. Like I said, some brakes have a little bit of a self-adjustment to them, so after you brake a few times, it'll kind of reset itself a little bit. But if you keep doing that and it's not resetting yourself, if you're going to be like me and you went on a 20-mile ride and realize your brakes are rubbing the entire ride, then that's not going to work for you. So you need the right wrench and an ordinary business card or piece of paper you can fold a few times. So it says business card or something like that. I use a piece of paper that I can fold up a couple times, and I want it about that long and about that long on each side. So I wish I had a piece of paper if I'd planned that correctly. So if you're taking this label here, something that maybe goes about this deep, that way this fits over the rotor. So you want it kind of thin. I found a piece of paper, you fold it over once, fold it in half once, and then fold it over again, and that's your way that you can set yourself up for a good tool to set up kind of a shim system, if you will. But you want it really thin. That's why we're using paper, but you want it thicker than just one little piece of paper. So it's kind of quirky little system here. So you need the right wrench. Make sure you have the right Allen wrench. Make sure you have metric or English units. Whatever you're doing, make sure you have the right wrench in there, because the last thing you want to do is strip your wrench or strip your bolts that connect it to your frame, because that's going to be a problem. So keep all oils from you and your hands, greases, lubes, etc., away from the brake pads and rotors. That's important. Don't be handling the rotors. Don't be handling the brake pads as much as possible. I use rubber gloves. That way I'm keeping the oils off from me on the bike. I'm not necessarily as much concerned about keeping the oil off me as a person, but you don't want to get stuff in there that gets caught in the brake pads and starts rubbing on the rotors. Then it starts creating rubs and grooves in there. And, with cars, you get the same thing. You get rubbing rotors and stuff, and it just gets in there and it causes problems later. You can get corrosion, all kinds of fun stuff. So make sure everything stays as clean as possible. Remove the rubber caliper from the frame, taking care of which bolt goes where. So you have to take the actual caliper off the frame. So you want to unbolt it. Don't take them out necessarily all the way. You got to make sure you know which bolt goes in the back, in the front, or whatever. Because if you mix them up, it could be different lengths and you could cause yourself problems. So make sure you're noting where those bolts are coming from if you take them out and remove them completely. So take care of where each bolt goes. Fold the business card in half over the piece of paper and slip it inside the caliper where the rotor would go and break. Wiggle and push caliper back over the rotor so business card paper is between the rotor and both sides of the brake pad. So, wheel still on the bike. You lift up the rotor after you've taken it off the frame. You lift up the rotor a little bit, slide a piece of paper in there, and then slide it back on the rotor. So then you've got rotor, paper, and then your caliper on top of that. So it's all jammed in there carefully. You don't want to cause a problem later. And make sure whatever you do not squeeze the brake while that caliper is off, because some hydraulic systems, that brake will permanently lock, and that's a whole other how to get that undone. So don't do that. But basically, you take the caliper off, put a piece of paper in there, put it back on the rotor, and then you've got the whole system set up to where you've got it sandwiched on there. Everything should be snug and secure, and nothing's really rattling around or moving or anything. So while keeping the caliper on the rotor, turn the wheel so the caliper lines up to the bolt holes in the frame. So you got your caliper paper on your rotor. So then you need to kind of rotate that wheel back to where you can get the caliper back on the frame. So you're getting ready to screw it back to the frame. Paper still in there, still on the rotor, calipers on there, and then rotate it so you can put it back in the frame. So put the bolts back through the caliper in the right location. Screw the bolts clockwise to the caliper is loosely mounted to the back of the frame with the business card still placed inside the caliper. Loose is a key. You don't want to tighten those bolts back down quite yet. So make sure they're still loose. Screw the bolts. We already did that. Squeeze brake lever and keep squeezed while tightening both brake calipers bolts fully. So there's a little bit of play in where there's slots in those bolt holes. So when you tighten it, that's where it is at permanently. So squeezing the brake, so you're telling the calipers this is where I want you centered, and then you screw down the bolts to the frame, and that's how you get it snug and secure on the frame in the right position. You're still holding on to that brake, handful of brake. You got paper caliper paper on the rotor, so that everything's in there, and you've got the caliper lined up with the bolt holes. Squeeze the brake, put the bolts in, and screw them down all the way while you've got the brake lever squeezed down tight. Release the brake lever and squeeze it a couple times as if braking. So you want to let it go, squeeze it, let it go, let it squeeze. So you bolted it down, kind of let go, squeeze, let it go, squeeze. Then turn the wheel while holding the edge of the business card, and the card will rotate with the rotor come out. So after you've done that, tighten down the bolt, squeeze the brake a few times, rotate the paper out, and spin the wheel, and it should be nice and clear. I mean, you want just a little minute, gap of light or something like that coming through the rotor and caliper, the brake pad. So spin it, brake a few times, and you should be good to go. It should pop right back out after you brake. Should be nice and loose and be able to just go through with no problem until you hit the brakes, and then you get a brake full of rotor, and then it should stop on a dime. So that's how I'd had to go through switching through my OR cycling wheels, my race wheels that I have, my disc on the back. From my everyday trainer wheels, there's a big difference in where that rotor sits. So I had to go through and do this process in order to make sure the brake pads aren't rubbing on the rotor and causing all kinds of problems later on. You definitely don't want to keep doing that on a consistent basis. So hopefully this helped you out. I know I went through it kind of quick. I know I don't have any visual examples. There are some other tutorials and stuff online, and that's kind of how I had to dig through and find all this information. But this is kind of my trial and error process that I went through that found that worked the best to get that rotor to the right position so I was not rubbing on my disc brake. So if it helped you out, give it a like, give it a thumbs up on Facebook, give it a like, subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell notification for future videos, and put any questions you have in the comments, Facebook, YouTube, anything like that. I get notification. I'll come back and hit you up with any questions that you have. Hopefully, you with an answer. That, we'll wrap this up, and we'll see you in the next video.